Elijah Crane came west to grow crops and forget the war, but when he struck bone digging a well, the ground whispered a truth louder than any cannon: this land remembers. Elijah Crane was tired. The Civil War had taken more than just years from his life, it had taken his peace. He'd seen too much fighting, too much death. Now all he wanted was a quiet place, far from the guns and the shouting. He yearned for the gentle whisper of the wind and the soft glow of the setting sun. So he sold everything he had left and bought a small patch of land way out west. It wasn't much, just dry earth and scrubby bushes under a big, open sky. But it was his, it was far away, and most importantly, it was quiet. Elijah imagined building a small cabin, planting a garden, and maybe even raising a few chickens. He pictured himself sitting on his porch, watching the stars come out, finally at peace. This land, he hoped, would be his sanctuary, a place to heal from the war's deep wounds. He wanted to forget the horrors he had witnessed and create a new life, filled with simple joys and quiet moments. He believed he could find that here, in this remote and untouched place. All he needed was water, a strong back, and a little bit of luck. He was determined to make this dream a reality. The wagon wheels crunched on the dry, dusty ground as Elijah arrived at his new home. The sun beat down, but a gentle breeze whispered through the tall grasses. He hopped down, stretching his stiff legs, and took a deep breath. The air smelled clean and fresh, a welcome change from the smoky battlefields he remembered. He unloaded his few belongings: a bedroll, a cook stove, some tools, and a sack of seeds. His first task was to build a small cabin. He started by clearing a space, his axe ringing in the quiet air. Each swing felt like a step further away from the war and closer to his dream. As the sun began to set, Elijah had managed to put up a few logs. He stood back, admiring his work. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He felt a sense of accomplishment, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He cooked a simple meal of beans and bacon over the open fire, the flames dancing merrily. As he ate, he looked up at the stars, which seemed brighter and closer than he'd ever seen them before. For the first time in years, Elijah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could find peace here after all. With the cabin walls slowly rising, Elijah knew his next task was crucial: finding water. He walked the land, searching for any sign: a patch of greener grass, a damp spot in the earth. Finally, he chose a spot near a cluster of cottonwood trees, hoping their roots knew where to find the life-giving liquid. He grabbed his shovel, the metal cold against his calloused hands. The sun was high, and the work was hard. Each scoop of dirt was heavy, the ground stubbornly dry. He dug deeper and deeper, sweat stinging his eyes. He imagined the cool, clear water bubbling up, quenching his thirst and nourishing his garden. He thought about the garden often as he dug. Tomatoes, corn, beans, a rainbow of life springing from the dry earth. He would trade with the nearby town and maybe even have enough to last him through the winter. But all of that depended on finding water. He pushed himself harder, his muscles aching, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The dream of peace, of a life renewed, kept him going. He had to find water. His future depended on it. The shovel struck something hard, not rock. It was a dull, sickening thud that resonated deep within Elijah. He frowned, wiping the sweat from his brow. He knelt down, brushing away the loose dirt, a glint of white. He dug more carefully now, his heart pounding in his chest. The sun beat down, turning the hole into a small oven. More white appeared, and then the unmistakable shape of a skull. Elijah recoiled, stumbling backward. He stared into the hole, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. More bones, ribs, arms, legs, a jumbled mess beneath the dry earth. And then he saw the remnants of clothing. Faded blue uniforms, tattered settler dresses, and the feathered headdresses of Native American warriors, all mixed together in a silent, horrifying heap. It was a mass grave, a final, gruesome testament to a bloody past he had hoped to escape. The peace he sought was buried beneath a history of violence. The land held a secret, and he had just unearthed it. A cold dread washed over him, chilling him to the bone. The dream of a new beginning felt suddenly fragile, threatened by the darkness he had uncovered. Elijah couldn't shake the image of the mass grave. He tried to continue building the cabin, but his hands trembled. He couldn't eat, the food turning to ash in his mouth. The silence of the land, once comforting, now felt heavy, oppressive. He felt like he was being watched, judged by the silent witnesses beneath the earth. He thought about reburying the bones, but the task seemed impossible, disrespectful even. How could he simply cover up such a tragedy? Yet, leaving them exposed felt equally wrong. He paced back and forth, his mind racing, unable to find a solution. A deep unease settled within him. It wasn't just the shock of the discovery, it was something more, something he couldn't quite name. A sense that he had disturbed something ancient and powerful, something that didn't want to be disturbed. He started to feel guilty, as if he were somehow responsible for the violence that had occurred on this land so long ago. He was an intruder defiling a sacred place. The dream of peace was fading, replaced by a growing sense of dread and a gnawing feeling that he didn't belong here. The land itself seemed to reject him. The first strange thing was the shovel. Elijah had left it leaning against a tree near the well, but the next morning it was gone. He searched everywhere, but it had vanished without a trace. He told himself it was just the wind or maybe a coyote had dragged it off, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. Then came the whispers. Late at night, as he lay in his bedroll, he would hear faint voices on the wind. He couldn't make out the words, but they sounded like a mournful chorus, a lament for the dead. He tried to ignore them, to tell himself it was just his imagination, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The animals started acting strangely too. The birds stopped singing, and the coyotes howled at all hours of the night. Even his horse, usually calm and docile, became skittish and restless, its eyes wide with fear. Elijah felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that he was no longer alone on this land. Something was watching him, waiting for him, and it didn't want him there. The mass grave had awakened something, and that something was now making its presence known. Driven by a desperate need to understand, Elijah started exploring the area around the well. He walked for hours, his eyes scanning the ground, the rocks, the trees. He was looking for something, anything, that could explain the strange occurrences. Finally, near a rocky outcrop overlooking the well, he found it. Carved into the stone were symbols, unlike anything he had ever seen before. They were intricate and ancient, a series of circles, lines, and stylized figures. He ran his fingers over the carvings, feeling the rough texture of the stone. He didn't understand what the symbols meant, but he sensed they were a warning, a message from the past telling him to stop, to turn back. He felt a chill run down his spine, a feeling that he was trespassing on sacred ground. The symbols seemed to pulse with a faint energy, as if the very rock was alive and trying to communicate with him. He knew, deep down, that he should heed the warning, that continuing to dig would only bring more trouble. But the thought of giving up, of abandoning his dream, was almost unbearable. He was trapped between his desire for peace and the growing realization that this land held secrets best left undisturbed. Elijah tried to ignore the warning, to convince himself it was just superstition. He told himself he needed water, that his survival depended on it. He returned to the well, his heart heavy, his resolve wavering. As he resumed digging, the strange occurrences intensified. The whispers became louder, more coherent, forming into distinct voices, calling his name, pleading with him to stop. The wind howled constantly, swirling around him, stinging his eyes with dust. The ground seemed to resist his shovel, each scoop becoming harder and harder to manage. One evening, as he sat by the fire, he saw shadows dancing in the periphery. He turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Then he heard the sound of drums, faint but unmistakable, echoing through the hills. He knew with a chilling certainty that the land was fighting back, that the spirits of the dead were restless and angry. Yet he persisted, driven by a stubborn determination and a desperate hope that he could somehow overcome the darkness and claim this land as his own. He was defying the warnings, tempting fate, and slowly unraveling the delicate balance between the living and the dead. The well, once a symbol of hope, was now a gateway to something far more sinister. The visions started subtly, fleeting images flickering at the edge of his awareness. A flash of color, the sound of gunfire, a glimpse of a face contorted in pain. At first, Elijah dismissed them as waking dreams, remnants of his own traumatic past. But they grew more frequent, more vivid, more real. He would be digging, and suddenly he was no longer in the present. He was standing on a battlefield, the air thick with smoke and the screams of dying men. He saw soldiers charging, settlers running in terror, and Native American warriors fighting with fierce determination. He felt their fear, their anger, their pain. He saw the events that led to the mass grave, the broken treaties, the stolen land, the brutal massacres. He witnessed the clash of cultures, the clash of weapons, the clash of wills. He saw the violence that had stained this land, the violence that had been buried but never forgotten. These visions were not just memories, they were experiences. He was reliving the past, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. The land was showing him its truth, forcing him to confront the darkness that lay beneath the surface. He was no longer just digging a well, he was unearthing a history of sorrow and bloodshed. And the deeper he dug, the more intense the visions became. One night the visions didn't stop when he closed his eyes. He lay in his bedroll, the whispers swirling around him, the drums pounding in his ears. Suddenly the air grew cold, and a figure materialized before him. It was a Native American warrior, tall and proud, his face painted with tribal markings. His eyes burned with a fierce intensity, and his presence filled the small cabin, making it hard for Elijah to breathe. The warrior didn't speak, but his gaze conveyed a clear and unmistakable message. Leave. Elijah tried to speak, to explain himself, but no words would come. He felt a wave of fear wash over him, a primal terror that he hadn't felt even in the heat of battle. The warrior raised his hand, and Elijah saw a vision of the land as it once was, untouched and unspoiled, teeming with life. Then the vision shifted, showing the arrival of the settlers, the broken promises, the bloodshed, and the mass grave. The warrior lowered his hand and the vision faded. He looked at Elijah with a mixture of sorrow and anger. Then he slowly faded away, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Elijah trembling and alone. The encounter was more than just a vision. It was a direct confrontation with the spirit of the land, a clear warning that he was not welcome here. The ghostly price of expansion was being paid in full. Elijah was shaken to his core. He knew he couldn't ignore the warrior's warning, but the thought of giving up, of admitting defeat, was almost unbearable. He had come so far, endured so much. He had poured his heart and soul into this land, hoping to find peace and a new beginning. He spent the next few days in a daze, wrestling with his conscience. He walked the land, looking at the cabin he had started to build, the garden he had planned to plant. He thought about the quiet evenings under the stars, the simple life he had envisioned. But then he would look towards the well, and the visions would return, the faces of the dead, the sounds of battle, the sorrow and anger of the warrior. He knew that staying would only bring more pain, more suffering, not just to himself, but to the land itself. He was trapped between his own desires and the weight of history. He wanted to claim this land, but he couldn't ignore the fact that it was already claimed by the spirits of those who had died there. He had to make a choice: continue his pursuit of peace at the expense of the past, or respect the dead and seek peace elsewhere. The land demanded respect, and he could no longer deny its claim. Despite the warnings, the visions, and the ghostly encounter, Elijah, in a moment of stubborn defiance, finally struck water. It bubbled up from the earth, clear and sparkling, seemingly answering his prayers, but the relief was short-lived. He drew a bucket of water and offered it to his horse. The animal sniffed at it hesitantly, then refused to drink. Elijah, puzzled, tasted the water himself. It had a metallic tang, a strange, unsettling flavor that left a bitter aftertaste. He tried to ignore it, telling himself it was just his imagination. But over the next few days, the animals grew sick. The birds that had returned to the area after he stopped digging began to die. The plants he had managed to cultivate started to wither and turn brown. The water, instead of bringing life, seemed to bring death. It was tainted, cursed by the spirits of the dead. He felt its negative influence seeping into the land, poisoning everything it touched. The well, which he had hoped would be his salvation, had become a source of corruption, a constant reminder of his transgression. The land was not only rejecting him, it was actively turning against him. He had unleashed something terrible, and now he had to face the consequences. Elijah stood at the edge of the well, staring into the dark water. He knew what he had to do. The land had made its will clear. He could no longer ignore the warnings, the visions, the ghostly presence, the tainted water. He had to leave. The decision brought a strange sense of relief, a feeling of finally surrendering to the inevitable. He had fought so hard to claim this land, but he had been fighting against something far greater than himself. He had been fighting against the past, against the spirits of the dead, against the very soul of the land itself. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He would have to pack up his few belongings, abandon the cabin he had started to build, and set out into the unknown once again. But he also knew that it was the right thing to do, not just for himself but for the land. He could either stay and continue to suffer, to poison the land and be haunted by the past, or he could leave and allow the spirits to find peace. The choice was clear. He had to respect the dead, honor their memory, and seek his own peace elsewhere. The land didn't want him, and he finally accepted that truth. With a heavy heart, Elijah began to pack his belongings. He carefully gathered his tools, his bedroll, and the few remaining supplies. He dismantled what he could of the cabin, leaving the logs neatly stacked, as if in offering. Before leaving, he walked to the well one last time. He took several large stones and carefully covered the opening, sealing it off from the world. He didn't know if it would appease the spirits, but it was the least he could do. He wanted to contain the tainted water, to prevent it from spreading further, to protect the land from further harm. He stood there for a long moment, looking out over the land, feeling a mix of sadness, regret, and a strange sense of peace. He had come here seeking solace, but he had found something far more profound. A connection to the past, a respect for the dead, and an understanding of the true cost of expansion. He turned away, mounted his horse, and rode off into the setting sun, leaving the land to its slumber, hoping that one day the spirits would find their rest. He carried the weight of his experience with him, a reminder of the importance of respecting the past and honoring the land. He hoped that his departure would bring some measure of peace to the troubled souls who remained behind. Elijah rode for days, not knowing where he was going, only knowing that he had to keep moving. He passed through dusty plains, rocky canyons, and towering mountains. He met other travelers along the way, cowboys, settlers, prospectors, all searching for something just like him. But Elijah's search was different now. He wasn't just looking for peace, he was looking for understanding. He carried the memory of the mass grave with him, a constant reminder of the violence and injustice that had shaped the West. He started to listen more carefully to the stories of others, to the tales of broken treaties, stolen land, and the displacement of Native American tribes. He began to see the West not as a land of opportunity, but as a land of sorrow, a land haunted by the ghosts of the past. He realized that his own desire for peace had blinded him to the suffering of others. He had been so focused on escaping his own pain that he had failed to see the pain of the land, the pain of its original inhabitants. He understood now that true peace could only be found through acknowledging the past, through honoring the dead, and through striving for justice. His journey had just begun. Years passed. Elijah never found the peaceful sanctuary he had initially sought, but he found something far more valuable, a purpose. He traveled the West, sharing his story, speaking out against injustice, and advocating for the rights of Native Americans. He became a voice for the voiceless, a champion for the forgotten. He used his experiences to educate others about the true history of the West, the history that had been buried beneath layers of myth and romanticism. He never forgot the land with the mass grave. He often wondered if the spirits had finally found peace. He hoped that his actions, his commitment to justice, had somehow helped to ease their suffering. Elijah Crane, the weary Civil War veteran who had sought only to escape violence, became Elijah Crane, the advocate for peace, the champion of justice, the voice of the West's forgotten souls. He had learned that true peace wasn't something you could find in a remote location. It was something you had to create, something you had to fight for. And so, his journey continued, a testament to the enduring power of hope, resilience, and the importance of remembering the past. His legacy lived on, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, one person can make a difference.